Welcome back to The Bridge, a music podcast where me and my co-host Zach sit down and discuss some new music that we hope that maybe you guys will enjoy. This week, particularly, is an album that we've been waiting for all year. Uh, I think, Zach, you mentioned to me that it was coming out in one of these previous episodes, and we've kind of kept a little bit of a tab on it as the week's been going by. But Xiu Xiu's "Oh No" has finally been released, and we've sat down with it almost 2 weeks now. Because we took a week off for Easter, so I haven't actually spoke to you in person for a good 2 weeks now. So it's nice to hear your velvety tones once again.
Oh, wow, I think that's the biggest compliment I've ever got on my rather ordinary and ugly voice in my life, but I appreciate it. And yeah, it's been a minute.
I'm also gonna grill you a little bit on an album that I supported in our last episode, but because of the content of the lyrics and the EP, I was thinking we'll probably do it at the end and
For
let
sure.
people know that and not
Well,
safe for work after a certain point.
it's funny that you say you will grill me because I think I will be doing the grilling, my friend.
All right, well let's get into Xiu Xiu. Uh, this is a hard to define band, I would say, but generally I would say it's a synth. Um, it's like a synth. I'd struggle to say rock, like some sort of synth adjacent focused band. There's a lot
Well,
of like vocal forward, but like a lot of sinister synth backing, some noise pop, some art rock, like electronic elements here. But he's a very creative, and Jamie Stewart being the figurehead of the band, he's a very creative composer. And so when he creates his albums, sometimes he'll base them off of like very niche ideas, or take very niche ideas and make them something else. Like he has an album entirely of Nina Simone covers. That is not what you would expect when you listen to it, or an entire album where they do the soundtrack of Twin Peaks. And so there's a lot of creative ideas that go into a Xiu Xiu album. And this time, the creative idea is everything is a duet.
yeah, that's right. And his big breakthrough album is called A Promise and came out around 2003. I'm not sure if he released a record before then or not,
He
but
did,
that's
yep.
when I discovered him when I was just a young kid and I was listening to a lot of emo music. And that was really popular at the time, especially among young people.
What's very interesting. I hadn't heard that album when I was young, but I actually went back this week and gave it a little bit of a late listen, because I was reading up about Jamie and Xiu Xiu, and it was an album he released after the death of his father, who committed suicide.
Mhm.
So that Promise was his first release after that, and so it became immediately interesting to me to go back and listen to it and see how Xiu Xiu sounded like in 2004-ish, I believe. Uh,
Yeah, like in
so
a more primitive form.
right, and so you're familiar with that album.
Yeah, so I discovered them just on the internet when I was, yeah, like 13, 14 years old, whatever. And I was attracted to it because there was a lot of emotion and it was really intense. But the discordant electronic production threw me off a little bit. I wasn't ready for it. And so I sort of left Choo Choo on the wayside for many, many years. And then I guess maybe 2 or 3 years ago, or maybe it was 2019, whenever they released whenever he released his last album.
Yes, 2019.
Okay, yeah, so I guess 2 years ago now. Um, and yeah, you recommended that I take a listen to the album, and so I started listening to the band again, and have since, went back and listened to those albums that you just mentioned, the Twin Peaks cover, soundtrack cover, and the cover of Nina Simone songs, and became excited about this latest upcoming release.
Right. And I was definitely excited because my introduction was actually very recent. It's through the 2019 release, "A Girl with a Basket of Fruit," which is
Okay, yeah.
a demonic possession of an album, to say the least. A lot of performance art incorporated in it, in the way it's delivered and it was very different from anything else I've really ever listened to. In terms of its like blend of harmony and melody with this cacophonous clashing and noise. And there's a song on there, Mary Turner, that is still difficult for me to listen to today just by the strength of it and the emotional potency of that song.
I think at this point in the band's career, their signature really is this balance they've been able to establish between the cacophonous and the harmonious.
Mhm.
Whereas when they started off and they were very raw, it was a very cacophonous and, though tender, still almost grating sound, a very noisy, uh, anxious sound that he was
Right.
putting out, and he's been able, I guess, as the years have gone on, to be able to balance that, and for that reason, I think this latest album, especially, is perhaps the band's most accessible.
Possibly. Um, there are a few times where on this album where he is more cacophonous than harmonious. Uh, but I think there is especially with some of the later tracks and some of the singles, a very more accessible nature to them. But I was curious about asking how do you feel about the synth nature of these albums uh, and kind of the artificial uh, instrumentation that he uses?
Uh, I like it because it's atmospheric. It doesn't. It doesn't give me the sense of being very synthetic in that way, sort of fake. Like he's trying to create some like landscapes, musical landscapes, and even in this record, I think there's a moment where he incorporates some field recordings of birds, and
Yes.
it just has a very textured feeling to it that for me makes it very alive and real and lively.
Right. He's very varied with his instrumentation. Um, there are a lot of synths here, and sometimes the synths are um, so close to another instrument that you might think it is, but it's like this really engineered synth that he's using. There's this goth rock track later in the track list that we'll get to, that I think he does this the most, where the song sounds like a goth rock track, but when you pay more attention, all of the drum and guitar parts are actually these synth lines that are so close that they kind of have this uncanny valley effect to them. And in the fact, I would say that the uncanny valley is a concept that I think is pretty important to kind of the reason I enjoy Xiu Xiu. I would say Xiu Xiu is the uncanny valley of sound. Everything here is like a ballad or kind of like a singer songwriter kind of structured song, but it's so off at the same time, where it's not quite that, and it's so close, but a little to the left or a little bit to the right of what it kind of feels like. That it feels uncomfortable, and I think you said anxious. It's the uncomfortable but weird and intriguing nature to the way that the songs are written or they're performed and put together and composed. I find to be the most compelling part of it, Xiu Xiu.
Yeah, I haven't done much background into this specific album or anything, but I did notice that he did an interview with Fantano, and I typically wouldn't look at the interview, but just had to because I wanted to hear what he was saying, and I just listened to the
Mhm.
first maybe 5-10 minutes, and he said, I am just naturally a very on edge type of person, and I think that comes through in his music very much.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah,
Um,
it's very anxious.
when it came to this album, he wrote, and maybe this is why it's the most accessible. I think this may be a sign of a change in kind of his outlook of things. But he says the features on this album reflect people that helped him realize the ratio of beautiful humans to shitty humans is more like 60-40, rather than what he had always assumed, 1 to 99. And so this is this unedged, kind of, what would I say, kind of
Pessimistic.
unedged, pessimistic, yeah, kind of individual who writes this music that kind of exudes that emotion, and you'll probably see that all throughout this album.
Yeah, and he said the duets actually came about because he was never anyone who did a lot of features or anything on any of his records, as far as I know. And
Mhm.
he said the idea of doing a duet album came about because just colleagues in the music industry and friends, musical friends who he knew through music, but didn't necessarily know on a very personal level, had reached out to him after he experienced a hardship in his life and a number of falling outs at around the same time. And this album was, essentially a labor of love that reflects the empathy and the kindness of others who reached out to him during this moment of difficulty in his life. And I think for that reason, it sounds a little more positive, and is can sometimes not be so discordant, not so cacophonous as you mentioned, even though it certainly is at times. And
Yes.
but for that reason, I think it is one of his more accessible albums. It can sometimes be melodic. It can sometimes incorporate just a very earwormy beat, and
Hmm.
yeah. For that reason, I think for people who are unfamiliar with Xiu Xiu, there are some standout tracks on this record that will be easy entryways to some of the more deeper and thought-provoking songs and albums that he
Right,
has
right,
since produced.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, let's before we get into the album proper, there's still I wanted to kind of engage with you over his voice. I'm
Uh-huh.
kind of curious, how do you digest his voice, because it is a very different from than your
So
average vocalist.
yeah, so his voice for me, I was when I discovered Xiu Xiu, and maybe this is a bit personal to me. I was listening to a lot of Bright Eyes at that point in my life, and especially these early Bright Eyes albums like Fever and Mirrors and some of the earlier records. And they have a very similar trembling, emotionally wrought, I wouldn't even say tenderness, but like somebody who is on the edge of going through a
Vulnerable.
major breakdown. Yeah, vulnerable is a great word to describe it.
Right, right.
And for that reason, I think from if you're listening to an album from front to back, it can be a pretty unnerving experience and almost exhausting
Absolutely.
in some ways. And for
Yes,
that
actually.
reason, it's the type of music that you'd listen to alone.
Yeah, absolutely. This is not something I don't think I'd sit down in the car with a group of friends and put any of this on. Maybe Rumpus Room, but that's about the extent of it. Um, Even then, I have to give them some prep before I put that one on. Um, but with me, I was kind of, he has a very melodrama to his voice, a lot of dramatic kind of falsettos on it, and he's kind of like a whispery, kind of whiny and drainy in some other points, and a lot much strong and verbose in other points. He kind of has a good range, and he plays within like really awkward, uh, eerie ranges that you can tell his not necessarily his natural singing voice, but maybe more uh, specific to what he wants to accomplish in the sound he gives off. I always thought he kind of puts off to me like the most left leaning David Bowie lyric. Like if when David Bowie gets on his weird train and he starts singing through some songs, you can get a little tinge of it there. I think that's the most familiar, but I enjoy it. But I can see some people being a little off put by it because it is very um, awkward in a way.
Yeah, it can be, and I see what you're saying about the Bowie comparison, like, on some deeper Bowie cuts,
Right, right.
he has a
Um,
tendency to strain his voice a little bit, but that being said, what you're saying about his voice, how he has a great range, I think that stands out especially on this record because it's a duet record, and so there's
mhm,
something to compare his voice with. There are always, like,
mhm.
some like, background vocals, whatever.
Um, yeah. So let's get into the album a little bit. Uh, Probably not going to go in order specifically because I think we should start with Rompus Room because I think Rompus Room, like you mentioned earlier, is an example of a Xiu Xiu song that is a great introduction for other people who are familiar with Xiu Xiu already.
I just
Uh,
wanted to ask, one thing, since it is a duet album, were you familiar with any of the people who featured on the record?
the only one I was somewhat familiar with was the other member of Xiu Xiu, um, Angela Sale, but everyone else I was not familiar with.
Okay, so, I knew Sharon Von Etten, she's got a new album actually coming out this year, but she released an album in 2018, it was, quite popular, pretty good album, and
Okay.
I was also familiar with Chelsea Wolfe.
Mhm.
She's quite she's quite a big female voice, in the metal scene. However, her last album came under some criticism, but, nonetheless, a strong female voice in the metal scene, and then also Liz Harris. She's
Okay.
the male vocalist of the band Grouper, which is just her own project, but is a very melancholic, meditative type of, mm, shoegazy after hours electronic music that,
Right.
yeah, you'd maybe listen to on your own time.
And all those tracks actually are pretty interesting on the album. The ones that you mentioned with these specific features. There are a list of features. I guess we'll get to a little bit later, or let's talk about the feature as we talk about the song. Um, but you're familiar with Sharon Van Etten. She's like from my research, she was kind of like an indie rock who artist who was also an actress.
Okay, yeah, really? I didn't know she had an acting career.
Right. That's the little bit I got. So you're more familiar with her from her, what I believe you said 2018 record.
Yeah, that's right. She's got a really nice voice. Like
Yes, yes.
her,
I
her
enjoyed her on this track.
yeah, her style of music is like a singer-songwriter.
Right. She starts the album off actually with kind of like that whispering delivery of no with a calming strumming as well. So already the album kind of starts off with a more harmonious and an easy entry than some of Zuzu's previous works, and goes to what you were saying about the accessibility. Um, and with this song and with other songs, because there is a duet nature to them all, sometimes they're are done in different ways, and this one is done in a more narrative way, I believe. There's a lot of dueling vocals where one person will deliver one line, someone will deliver another line, and then we'll meet in the middle and harmonize other sections of the song. And this is uh, reminiscent of this song. This is how this one is kind of structured out.
Yeah, this song
Uh,
is like it's lyrically it's conversational. It's like they're talking back and forth to one another.
right, and also like Sad Mescalita, the song, Mescalita being a drink. And so there's this image and kind of with the tones that are encompassing the song in general and kind of gives it this eerie feeling and kind of like, again, that uncanny valley to like a ballad where it gives off a very melancholy and somber tone. These two people talking and getting to the facts of the matter over a drink. And that's kind of the image that the album opens with, especially with the sharing with her vocals and Jamie's dueling vocals back and forth.
Yeah, and but it's very accessible because at the beginning it's quite sparse. It's just her voice and the chords of an acoustic guitar, and she has this refrain "na na na," and the pluck of the strings follow her refrain, and
Mhm.
I thought her voice also had a bit of perhaps a more angelic quality to compared to Jamie Stewart's, but it still had this very fragile gentleness that played very well with his voice. I thought they complemented each other quite well.
Right. When they do the harmony sections, uh, because Jamie's vocals are so unique, I always find that he's very discordant with and in the harmony sections. His
Mhm.
voice is very clear and pops out amongst uh, at least Sharon's vocals here. In some other places, he kind of sneaks his voice in a little better, but here it's very discordant. But I don't dislike that actually. I don't think it's necessarily bad. I think because of the a library of interesting and uncomfortable synths on this album, um, it kind of feels right. Like it kind of fits within that Xiu Xiu stamp signature sound, even though he's discordant and a little off tune with Sharon. It kind of adds to that overall emotional tone that Xiu Xiu is known for.
Yeah. Yeah, like, it added a layer of softness that in retrospect, is kinda missing a little bit from his discography, and I
Hmm.
thought that his yeah, like, the discordant and cacophonous nature of his voice, the crackling nature of it, was supported by some of her softer harmonies.
Right. Um, so this is the first track on the album. Then it
Which,
moves in.
it's a lit I found it a little bit of an oddball track to open with.
Yeah, yeah. In terms of pacing of the album, it's a little oddly paced, I think.
Yeah, it
Um,
is, yeah.
it's not. I would say any. There might be a little bit. Well, I don't think there's any one song that you could just click and turn on this album that doesn't encompass Shoo Shoo in some way that, and in it is a song that I enjoy to listen to, with maybe one exception. Um, so like it's weird where it's oddly paced and there's not a narrative structure in the album at all. It's just it is what it is. It is what it's been sold at is a album of duets with people that he cares about. And so in terms of pacing and narrative and kind of like the shape of the album, it's a little discordant in that kind of way as well.
Yeah, it's a
There's
bit
no like
fast and loose.
interludes or there's no interludes or any connecting sounds from one song to the next song or anything like that. It is they're all their individual pieces.
Yeah,
And so
stand yeah, standalone songs, yeah.
right, so yes, it's a weird one to open with, but at the same time, with the way the album is structured with, it's just as good as any song, I guess, with what they're going for here.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I can certainly agree with that. There's not really a song you could, choose from the track listing and say, "Yeah, I think this will be the introductory track," because there's not really, like you said, any sort of consistent idea or, narrative, anything like that that thrusts through the album. Each song, you have to sort of take it as it is.
Right? They're all like encompassing of like kind of what Shoo Shoo writes of it in general, like family politics, sex, love, and loveless, and suicide, and how they're all connected. As Shoo Shoo has noted before, that's kind of what they write about, and they don't really stray that far from those kind of ideas on this album either, even within the ballads that are found here. Um, so another song that was pretty interesting to me was "I Cannot Resist," which is the second track on the album, and this one features Drab Majesty, and features most specifically the singer Deb Demore.
Yeah, this song reminded me of a Sufjan Stevens type of track, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
It
Okay.
was like a piano-driven ballad, more or less.
Right. There's like piano, synth harmony, there's atmospheric samples. This is the bird song that you mentioned. Also got some chimes and strings and maybe a xylophone or a xylophone-esque synth that's in there. A lovely refrain as well from Drab Majesty. This is a I like the song a lot because of the left turn it takes halfway through. And do you know what I'm talking about?
Just explain what you mean.
When he like song is generally a love ballad and kind of straightforward for like the first half of the song until he gets to the point where he sings "Bong Bing Bonko Bong," a head rolling down the stairs, and suddenly the whole tone of the song shifted for me, and like rereading the lyrics and realizing that this is like some sort of like murder scenario and like this passionate scenario that kind of what I thought probably is what you'd find on murder ballads, which you've mentioned before.
Yeah.
So I thought that maybe this is a song you were attracted to on that basis.
I found a lot of the songs on this record, honestly, function the way you were just describing, where they'll sort of incorporate an element here and an element there at the beginning of the first half of the song, but not necessarily together. And then at the second half, there's like a shift in tone, or he'll introduce some strong percussion line, and then all of a sudden, all the different elements that were introduced at the beginning of the song begin to crescendo and climax together towards the end.
Right. This one, I'm particularly fond of the breakdown that they create with the birds and the chimes that you mentioned. That starts at like a minute 30. It's this
Mm-hmm.
like kind of sprawling cacophony that morphs into this more melodic scene when the birds and like the chimes break out. That then eventually merges into that bing bongo line, head rolling down the stairs, and then it just it kind of reminded me right there at the end. It's like, oh yeah, I'm listening to Xiu Xiu. Yeah, this is. I should have expected that.
Yeah, it's perhaps one of the more atmospheric tracks on the record, I would say.
Yeah, it does build and have that like breakdown section that's really loud and cacophonous. But before that, it's more. I struggle to say standard because nothing on this album, especially when you get Jamie's hands all over it, feels standard. Even though it's kind of like I said, the uncanny valley where it almost is, but he just makes sure that it doesn't quite fit or feel as standard as it is. The next song is a song I recommended that we talked about, which was the Grifters. You said to me that was a little interesting. Is there a reason why you thought that was interesting?
So yeah, this song just wasn't particularly interesting to me. It seemed to me to be like something I would come to expect from Xiu Xiu. It was like one of the more discordant tracks on the album I found, with the very loud horns, and it was more noisy and had, yeah, like more noisy elements, but there was nothing really that was. Not that it was a bad song, but it wasn't particularly remarkable compared to some of the others.
Right, and I'm going to couple this with another song because, and I'll connect the thoughts here in a second. With that being your thoughts on the Grifters, how did you end up feeling about Saint Dymphia? I may pronounce that wrong. Saint Dympha.
Saint Dymphna.
Dympha.
Uh, so I had recommended this song, right? And
Yes.
it was a note to you as well. But coming back to it, I wasn't so sure. Like, it had more strained and discordant vocals, which was classic Juju to me. And similar to how we were just saying, like the musical elements crescendo towards the end, it was sort of more. I felt like he was going into an area of comfort with these songs that sort of, I guess, stood out because of the collaborative nature of some of the other songs, which, yeah, gave the band a new sound.
Right. I thought these were very similar songs. They both kind of do the same kind of thing, and I enjoyed them both for specifically the chorus work being extremely well. I think that his harmony in Grifters with Haley Four, which is a Chicago kind of like a baritone folk artist, was very interesting. and very compelling. And I thought it was the best harmony section on the album, which is when he and Haley on the Grifters sung the chorus. Now, in terms of song structure, the verses kind of lose me a little bit. You're right; it's a kind of a strummy harmony, male female vocal, kind of a ballads you going kind of like dramatic synth tones and the strings and all that, and it's kind of not it's kind of par for the course for kind of the more mundane tracks on the album, the ones that kind of fit together a little bit. And I think that the Grifters and Saint were of the same ilk when it comes to that, where they had very compelling parts and on their own, outside of the context of the full album, are great songs. But I think they kind of blend in a little bit with some of the longer runtime of this album.
For sure. I will say about Saint Dymphna that it has a sax, and the sax really builds and is a central part to how the song concludes. I just wish it was incorporated more consistently throughout the song. It doesn't really
Right.
begin to feature until towards the end. It introduces itself midway through the track, but it really is the end note on how the song concludes itself. And it's perhaps my favorite ending to any song on the record. But gets a little bit otherwise the song I found gets a little bit lost.
Right. I like I said, I think the harmony and the vocal duet is really compelling on both of those, and that's kind of the main event for both of them. But in terms of instrumentals, still very compelling. Like to listen to a Xiu Xiu song in general, I think he does a good job being composing his songs. But I think it loses some of its spec when you sandwich it in with all these other tracks. It doesn't do enough to stand it from the herd in that regard. So I thought those were both songs that accompanied that kind of emotion for me from this album.
So you wanted to talk about Rumpus Room.
Yeah, Rumpus Room is what I would consider the most Xiu Xiu song on the album. People who just came from the 2019 album or some of the previous albums will find yourself very at home here. The duet is with the Australian rock band Liars. And this a song is like between the low-key name drops to Flaming Hot Cheetos and Fuego Takis and Unwrapping a Cutie over a disembodied chorus with a hellaciously catchy synth line and a low-tempo groove and just fucked up lyrics and a collage of vocal samples over the chorus. It's just so devilishly catchy and weird that I can't help but move and groove to the song, even though it feels like I'm in a bar in hell.
Yeah, sort of a little bit interesting. They say like this is you'll feel at home if you're a Xiu fan with this song because while I agree that the lyrics are certainly hellish and horrific, it is more of is perhaps one of the most I don't want to say mainstream because then it sounds like it's like pop music or something that's cheap. But
It's just the
it's
most catchy and groovy of the on the album.
yes, yeah, it's certainly one of the more catchier songs I think I've ever heard from Xiu Xiu, and for that
Right,
reason, one of the most accessible.
right. The song felt like the vague memory of last night's LSD trip. Uh, like just like from weird thoughts and the way the lyrics are put together, like they're non sequiturs all over the place. The chorus is just like rompus room, 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 black, black, blue, 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 rompus room, Krampus room. And like it just goes, and it's
And
like these non sequiturs all over the place. And it's just this chaotic
uh
mess, but it sounds good, as
and
he's
yeah,
out.
and the lyrics are they're not they're sort of sung like I wrote down that they sound sort of like a rap interlude, like they're not really sung, they're sort of just spoken underneath all the synth and the catchy bass line. And like you said, yeah, it's sort of a song that puts you in the weird space of having a really fucked up night before, and then you went to the bar to try to get over your hangover,
Right. It's just
and you're just in this weird space.
right. It's all over the place and so weird and awkward and so endearing because of it to me. Very endearing. Yeah, is how I would say. Very endearing. And that's kind of what I like from my Xiu Xiu is it's kind of that oddity that they go with, where they'll have these compelling lyrics, but they're also not afraid to, like on the last album, sing about 1,000 butthole fleas getting eaten by a frog, and it's just like these crazy weird imageries and oddities that Jamie will go for, which you'll find on Rompus Room on this album. But honestly, it's the only spot you're going to find it on this album because I think this is the only song that really encompasses that sound.
Yeah, it's definitely the most fun track on the album. That's for sure. And I think it's just part of the reason is it's the most synthetic track on the album. Like the band is known for incorporating a lot of unusual instruments, and they live up to their reputation on this record here. However, Rumpus Room does that the least,
Right,
which is
right.
not a knock against the track, but I think is perhaps one of the reasons why it's yeah, just f- fun to listen to and great for a more casual music listener.
Right.
Like you could feature this track on like some party track that you like or party playlist that you put on when your
you
friends
could
come over
sneak it
to have
in there. I think you could sneak it in there. Someone might raise an eyebrow and be like, "What am I
well, you
listening to?"
just put it deeper into the track list when everyone's a little bit drunk, and I think
Yeah.
they'll vibe with it.
Get everyone a few drinks deep and then sneak this one on there. I think you might be able to get away with it. I agree.
Yeah.
What were some other highlight tracks for you?
So I think the centerpiece of the album is 100 Years, which is the Cure cover.
It's a cover.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, it's a cover of the Cure song.
see, I'm not super familiar with the Cure. That makes a lot of sense now after listening to that song. This is the goth rock track I referenced earlier
Uh-huh.
with Chelsea Wolfe. This is probably the longest song on the album, I believe.
Yeah, it's by far 6.5 minutes.
Yeah. So yeah, this is like the longest one at 6.5 minutes on the whole album. I kind of wrote that this was like a throwback goth song, which makes a lot of sense because it's literally a throwback goth song. Um, so that one,
So just wait a second.
I kind of threw me off because I'm not familiar. I wasn't familiar with the song. I didn't know it was a cover. So
Okay,
a lot of
that's
my
cool.
comments are kind of funny because
But but
I
that
said
being said,
like I could
that being said, it's the song that reminds me the most of his last album, "Girl with a Basket of Fruit," because of the goth and the horror element nature of the song.
yeah, I can see that. I can see that. Um, I wrote here that it really reminded me of that old goth rock stuff, like you showed me Alien Sex Fiend,
Uh-huh.
and
Yeah.
it came off sounding like one of the longer tracks, like on that album,
Uh-huh, yeah.
like Reanimator or something like that. It was called, and that's kind of what put me in mind of. And I thought this was a little a nice different flavor on the album. I thought it really stood out amongst all the other tracks, even though it is like a duet, like everything else. It was structured a little bit differently. It kind of came off a little differently, and he recreates all the instruments here with synths, which I thought was really compelling. And
Yeah.
even though it sounded so much like the original instrumentation, a closer ear, and it's like this is all synth made, and I thought that was really compelling as well.
Yeah, I thought the way he used the synths on this track had a lot of like it added that horrific element, that sort of those sort of horror goth oriented elements that you hear on "Girl with a Basket of Fruit," and like you said, some of the earlier goth rock music from like the early '80s.
Uh,
Also, I thought the song was quite interestingly paced in the sense that it's very aware of using pauses, and for that reason, it has sort of, I guess, what you could characterize as drops in the sense of electronic music, where they have periods where the music dies completely, and then they're just singing the duet, and then there's a pause, and then the music kicks back in again.
Right.
And I thought the nature of the song was very electronic.
Is that in the original composition? How does this compare to the original?
I like this song actually better than the original. I'm not intimately familiar with the original song, but I have listened to it and listened to it again. But I like the cover more, honestly. I thought they did a really great job with it.
Yeah, I'm going to have to listen to the original myself after we record because I'm interested in seeing how that compares. Because I was really a big fan of the last section during the last verse where the song really explodes and justifies its length.
Hmm.
They mix their vocals over the top of the sinister goth synths, and it's very lovely. And it just makes me feel like I'm dancing with my Frankenstein bride in the thunder. Just it's
Well,
very
yeah.
moody.
Compared to like if you were with the right crowd, like you could put on Rompus Room and 100 Years at a party, and people could dance to it. Like the songs are danceable.
Like there's a weird like line to it all where it's very off, but it's also still has a core there that is danceable and movable and a little more accessible, but it's still like drenched in that Xiu Xiu flavor that is off-putting.
Yeah, certainly off-putting, but I wouldn't go ahead and call 100 Years or Rompus. They're not anything. There's nothing cacophonous about those songs. There's not any grating sounds, for instance. And in fact, they have really nice harmonic vocals upholding them, which is what I wanted to ask you next. What did you make of the duet between Chelsea Wolfe and Jamie Stewart?
I thought their harmony was really good. I enjoyed their work together here, and I actually enjoyed where Chelsea Wolfe kind of does her own singing. There's a little bit of an effect on her voice, and it's kind of like off the side to mix when she comes in during the verse. Um, I enjoyed that a lot actually, just when she kind of sung on her own, and I
Uh-huh.
enjoyed that part of the duet when they were dueling. When they did the harmony, they fit together, and he fit into her range better. Um, but I kind of enjoyed her solo stuff on this song a little bit better.
Okay, that's interesting because um, I liked the balance that they both had because I found he certainly dominated over her voice, but they buried her voice maybe a little bit in the background, and it just brought out a nice balance. And it can be loud, but it's very much on the edge. And her voice was almost, it sort of supported his, and I thought it like I could hear both their voices very clearly in the mix. And I guess maybe it's a testament to not only to how the vocals are, but how well he is at mixing his records. Like all the elements are so easy to distinguish from one another.
Right, right. They all have their space, and even when they get crowded on top of each other and they create these cacophonous aspects, they're still mixed well and defined that you can kind of pull them apart if you wanted to. There is a song I did want to get to. I gotta talk about because it's probably my least favorite song on the album, and it's a bottle of rum. Uh,
Okay.
how did you end up with this one?
I'm a little bit interested to know why it's your least favorite because I thought it would perhaps be a good song to introduce the record, honestly, because it has distorted percussion, but also has nice acoustic and electronic chords. And I thought that created a good balance, but also perhaps the best way to summarize this strange synthetic duet ballad, sometimes dancey record that is a little bit all over the place.
So this song stood out to me because it's so different on the album. It's so different than everything else, in my opinion. This is very much like an indie folk song. She kind of like Liz Harris delivers over the top of it, a very indie ambience with her singing. Um, and then I thought Jamie's falsetto with her was very discordant, like that first song with Sharon Van Etten. But because the music in that first song was so disjointed a bit and odd and awkward and kind of had that Xiu Xiu energy a bit, that it's kind of fit. Here, it's the same thing, but everything's more clean and it's more of a strummy, atmospheric indie rock song. And so his clashing in the harmony just kind of felt ugly to me, and it didn't fit the overall tone of the album at all. It felt just like a standard indie rock song with a little bit of a it kind of felt like you're looking at a family photo of your goth stepsister from like 10 years ago, or you're seeing emo stepsister from like 10 years ago, and she just stands out so odd in the track. And that's what Jamie feels like to me on this track. He's just a weird adjacent piece that doesn't quite fit for me. I just feel like it was a merger that didn't quite come together.
Okay, that's interesting. See, so I'm familiar with Liz Harris, and like her music is she has one album in particular. It's called "Dragging a Dead Deer Up the Hill," and I thought that their voices didn't clash at all. I thought their voices complemented each other quite well, and his especially towards the end, the way his voice sort of rises over hers. Yeah, it was. I can see what you're saying about it being a little bit more of like an indie song, maybe. But I thought he incorporated good distortion on this track, especially with the percussion and in the vocals also, and it gave it a little bit of an edge. Maybe it's one of the less edgier songs. Maybe you're right, but I think as a standalone song, I kind of liked it.
Yeah, it's a standalone song, sure. Um, it just felt so alien on this album by how clean it came off to me, and like kind of how well produced and like indie it was. It just didn't
Yeah,
feel like it fit.
especially at the end of the record, I can see where you'd get that vibe.
But there's also ants, which doesn't make any sense. But that's beside.
That is the most bizarre thing that like I just why? I just don't
Yeah,
understand.
I wrote. I don't know what ants is. I didn't. I don't think it needs to be there, but I don't know if it needs to go either. Like I don't. I guess just keep it there. It's like 15 seconds and just the weirdest little refrain you'll ever hear. Yeah,
And
I suggest the listener to just go listen to that. But wait, okay, don't listen to
well,
that song until after you've listened to everything else, because
and the
it is
thing is
just the weirdest end.
it's 15 seconds, so like by the time you stop what it is you're doing, realize, oh my god, this is annoying the shit out of me, and then you open up Spotify or Apple Music or whatever it is you're streaming the song on, this it's over. And so you always listen to it, no matter what. At least that was
Exactly.
my experience with ants.
I didn't know if it was. I thought the album had ended and Spotify had gone on to another playlist or something.
Yeah.
And then I checked. I was like, wait a second, what? This is actually on the album, but that's another thing altogether. I didn't know how to approach that track. It's just the last track. It's 15 seconds, and it's just it's kind of funny, honestly, in terms of like its placement. So
But,
I thought it was worth mentioning.
yeah, obviously it's an acronym for something, I don't know, but, it's an enigma. What can I say? But,
Um,
I also wanna know this album is called "Oh No,"
mhm.
however, we have skipped over the song "Oh No," and I think the reason is because, especially for a title track, rather unremarkable.
Yeah, it kind of is. It's okay. It's kind of bleeds in and it's over really quickly. It's like a 2 minute song. It's just kind of
And
when you got this 15 15 it seems a little weird with ants on here. When you got like a 14 song album that's like 53 minutes long, a 2.5 minutes can kind of just disappear. And I think so. Oh no was one of those songs that just kind of
es
disappears.
especially because it's placed right next to Rumpus Room. Which is such a standout track that makes "Oh No" even that much more forgettable, and I think is a testament to perhaps a little bit of the not poor pacing, but haphazard pacing on the record.
Right. This one, it just felt like a little weird. Um, it's not a bad song, I would say. I don't think there's any bad songs on the album per se, but there is a little bit of a pacing issue. Um, and I guess like if he wants to have an effort with everyone that kind of spoke out to him and inspired him for this album, I think that's more important,
Yeah,
probably.
which I can certainly understand. But why this? Why name this song? Oh no, I'm just
Right.
it's the
It,
title
it,
track to your album, and it's one of the more forgettable tracks.
yeah, it just kind
When
of fades. It just kind of is there, especially with the bloated track listing. It's some tracks are just kind of gonna fall to the side, and obviously we're not talking about every track on the album here. We're kind of picking out some highlights to kind of mention to you guys. Uh, but Oh No is kind of like just mentioned because it is the title track, but it did fall into the side with some of the other tracks that uh, we're neglecting to mention as well that you will listen to as you go through. That I don't think are bad songs. Like honestly, if you just put on any song on this album, honestly, and just listen to it brand new, just like it's the first time you listen to it, I think they all have a compelling structure or idea to them. I just sometimes with the entire album in view that some of them get a little blurry.
Yeah, there's no song on here that you would say, "Oh God, what happened here?" or that
Right.
stands out as being particularly weak, other than perhaps "Ants."
Ants
Um,
doesn't count. I'm not counting Ants as a song. I don't
no,
think there's an
no, I know,
instrument.
but I mean, let's just take the piss out of "Ants" while we have the opportunity. Um, but there are some songs that just don't that stand out as being not as good as the others because there are so many good songs on this record.
Right, right. Um, I think that's good for covering the album. What did you what were your ultimate thoughts about this whole piece? Like I think that we both shared that idea that some of the songs get buried a little bit. Um, but it's I think overall a pretty compelling and interesting concept album of sorts.
Well, I think, Xiu Xiu is forever putting out concept oriented albums. And yet again, he delivers I don't know if I would call it necessarily, concept, but he decides to do a album full of duets, which is something that he's never done before. He rarely features artists. And so again, it's a point of intrigue. And it certainly got me excited for the album when I realized that it was full of duets. And I gotta say, I thought even though the pacing perhaps suffered a little bit because of it, I thought that every song was very fresh. And the track listing never got boring from one song to another. Yeah, I really liked the album, and I thought it was some of his most accessible music to date.
Right, I agree with you. I really enjoyed this album. I gave it a lot of listens and a lot of good moods and tones coming out of this that I was really compelled with. Um, I like the concept, and like I said, I could listen to any of the songs and enjoy them. There are highlights here. I think "Rompus Room" is a very good highlight. I think "I Cannot Resist" is a good highlight. "100 Years" is a highlight. Those are some ones that stand out to me as go towing songs, I guess. Jump over to that, but I definitely enjoy this album. Considering how long it was, I still found motivation to listen to it.
Mhm.
I just enjoy a lot of Jamie's work. It's definitely a band I intend to go back to. They always have a very good seal of quality whenever a Xiu Xiu album comes out.
Yeah, it's always quality, and there's always thought put into the music, which I think is part of the reason why Xiu Xiu is such a compelling band. And whenever they release music, I'll certainly be checking it out in the future.
Right, so I'm gonna walk away and say rated this album a strong 8 to a 9, somewhere in that range is where I'm feeling.
Okay, yeah.
Might sell on an 8.
Yeah, I think for me, I don't think it's getting up in that 9 category. Just I think perhaps there's no filler songs like you said because of the place where this album came out of, but it runs a bit long. Certainly does, and like we were saying with a song like "Oh No," "Goodbye for Good" is perhaps another song, or the egregious ants. There are just some tracks here where I wonder why,
Hmm.
and so I think it's going to be more of an 8 for me on perhaps the lesser end, sort of staring down towards a 7, but
Sure.
nonetheless, a stamp of approval and recommendation. And I agree with you as far as all the entry tracks. I Cannot Resist, Rompus Room, 100 Years, all solid tracks, and a great way to discover new artists too. If you haven't heard of artists such as Sharon Von Etten, Chelsea Wolfe, Liz Harris, and so on.
Right, right. Um, all right. I think there's a bit time that maybe you should tell me how you thought about that album I was talking about last week. I
Okay,
think
so
I've been anxiously awaiting your viewpoint.
introduce this album for me. Could you please?
This album, this is a 16-minute hyper pop slash metal Gen Z sexually hyper focused, hyper energized album with just a lot of personality, uh, slightly annoying, but like charming, I would say.
Okay, so I didn't listen to this album from front to back, but I listened to a few songs, ones that came highly recommended by you. Notably, "Hi, I'm a Slut" and "Cat Boys."
Right,
Uh,
right. Cat
I
Boys
just
is my favorite song on the album.
okay,
Hi, I'm a Slut is not my favorite song on the album, mostly because of the little audio clip in it. Uh, it kind of grates me, but I think that's the only point on the album like that. But
okay, so for most people around the world who are going to Go and her self-titled release, they're probably going to listen to at least "Hi, I'm a Slut" because it's the introductory track on this record. And this album, or this song in particular, is very problematic in many ways. For one thing, it perpetuates this very toxic image of women that I think is emerged, especially with internet culture, where 12-year-old boys can get on the internet and look at women degrading themselves on pornography websites and think that's normal and okay, and then they end up having really fucked up and unhealthy sexual lives because yeah, what sex is actually like in real life doesn't reflect the weird representation that they experience on the internet. And I am reminded of a rather, yeah, regrettable Cardi B song, which goes under the acronym of WAP, which stands for Wet Ass Pussy.
Mhm.
And essentially, this song is the exact same
I need.
as the Cardi B song.
I should also say I love that song as well.
Okay, well, and I just don't get it. I just don't see what the appeal is. It seems like it's just a hyperbolic, potentially dangerous representation of young people and what sexual relationships are like, and it's if anything, is denigrating towards women. I don't know, like, why as a woman she wants to put this out there. For
But I don't agree with you at all when it comes to how this degrading imagery of women. If she's putting this out there on her own free will, I think that's the point. And she's allowed to have control over her own sexual thoughts and expressions. Uh, like you might say about porn workers, I don't think that that's necessarily toxic either. I think there's the conversation around sex itself needs to change, not the people talking about it. And so I'm happy when I hear such dominantly feminine in terms of even the sexual energy, the sexual dynamic of like dom women stating their sexual interest and perversions and stuff as well, and being a more full person, and not only men who can state these kind of ideas. I don't know what world it is that you want to cultivate where you censor this or you don't embrace this kind of dialect, because I think a world where this conversation is normalized is a better place. And honestly, I've met women who talk like this, so this, I think in terms of sexual dynamics, this is a very interesting album.
Yeah, well, I mean, like here in Germany, sex work is legal, right? It's taxed by the government. And so I was watching a documentary, and there was a woman, I think she worked in like a fish plant by day, and then at night she was a sex worker. And for her, it was just a way of making a living.
Right.
But when someone is calling themselves a slut and a whore, and these words have a negative connotation to it. It has actually a connotation of submission, and the complete opposite of what you're talking about, of a woman taking control of her sexuality.
I think being submissive and referring to yourself in those ways can both be related to taking back the power of those things. Also, in being a sub in the sexual uh, position, or a dom in a sexual position, or to having a personality or sexual orientation that kind of fits you in between both. I think they're both part of having that sexual control over your body and your language. And even if she refers to herself like, it kind of in a parody, honestly, in the opening track, like "Hi, I'm a slut," but in almost like taking it back. But it also fits within that sexual energy that they embody. It's still placing yourself in that place is still part of your sexual energy that you can refer to and speak to. It's not. It's demeaning, sure, but that's also can be part of a sexual dynamic. And I think it's still important to be able to control those aspects and being able to consensually be placed into them with your partner or whoever you choose to have your partner. And as long
I,
as
I
those with the constraints that are controlled, I don't see a problem.
Yeah, I see what I see what you said. I see what you mean, especially by that last part. And if maybe little Mariko, if her intention is to take ownership of that, then I understand. But at the same time, it's hard to say that there's going to be some young kid who's going to listen to this, or see someone on the internet acting like this, and then treat a girl the same way that this girl says she wants to be treated, whether or not whether or not she's making a parody or not. And for that reason, it's just vulgar.
In the same way where I would expect people to be able to have conversations with violence in movies and TV or video games, or understanding those realms, I would also expect that to be placed upon music. I don't think taking how someone digests a song from the way it's intended and what its purpose is and what it encompasses, I don't think the fault can be put on the artist. I think as a young person, their life should be supported, especially in their sexual journey, should be supported as they grow. And these conversations, especially the young males, to how they relate or engage with women and how they express that relationship in their life should be, or women to women, men to men, however it is, however your sexual orientation that you fall. I think that's more, but for someone individually, and that requires more individual care and tasks. Where I think these songs are more expressions of more emotionally mature people who can kind of understand what it is that they're hearing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know how emotionally mature little Mariko is. I think she's only like 19 or 20 or 21 or something like that.
Sure.
My biggest fear is just that, like some young person is going to listen to this and then go out and, treat some unfortunate girl like less than human.
Right, right. But that's been the case for a long time with that music like this. I can see where your fear of being influenced by this is. But again, there's like a lot more songs on here that encompasses more about that dynamic than the
I
two that you
never.
like. 100 Dicks is her annoyance with people sending her dick pics in her
Yeah.
DMs all the time, and how it's annoying. And there's another song about if you come up on me and you kind of like come up to me with it like and disrespect me, I'm gonna castrate you with my Louis Vuittons. And so she takes a very vulgar way to go about it, but she does kind of like speak to these kind of things. It's just in a very callous and like immature sounding way, but it is a
Yeah.
sign of a rising uh, feminine sexuality that is becoming more and more acceptable, and which I think can only deem as a positive.
I can agree with that for sure. She's at least trying to take control of the conversation, even if she goes about it in sort of radical and vulgar ways. However, as far as the music goes, there's nothing that really stands out to me. It was sort of seemed quite conventional as far as, just there's some looping bass and some synths and
Yeah, it's kind of like the punk-esque version of pop and like sex pop. It's very kind of like minimal and just kind of like oozing with personality, and it's just kind of chocked full for 16 minutes of just these, track after track after track of these kind of like oozing personality tracks. The instrumentals are not obviously something that are well layered in, well, not exactly layered, but like they don't build in these grand orchestral ways. They're straight to the point. The lyrics are easy to hear and super focused and kind of draw your attention through the whole album. Is her personality, the things that she's saying, and plus a little bit of like the gumminess that comes along with it. I think that's what's going to draw you through the 16 minutes. And I again, I really enjoyed that album, and it's like such a little snippet that it kind of like was kind of like an EP. But I just enjoyed the energy. I don't know how much of it is character or to put on for performance. I don't know the line there, and I don't think I need to know, honestly. I think I just enjoy what is being presented.
yeah, it's just certainly an album that tries to capture its audience by being shocking.
Mm-hmm.
And if
The shock
you're
value.
somebody who likes WAP, for instance, you'll probably have some fun with these songs. And I guess in a way they can be fun, but at the same time, I just think that they're more harmful than they are good.
I'll disagree with you there, but well, we'll let the viewers decide this. I hope people what I'm thinking about right now, but I'm curious what the if the audience could leave some comments and let us know how they felt about the album and where they land, because I think it's an interesting conversation that goes beyond this LP.
I mean, it's certainly a conversation piece, and I think it's the type of album that generates discussions like this, and that's part of the point, is because it's trying to be contentious, it's trying to be inflammatory.
Right.
I mean,
Well,
the entry track is called "Hi, I'm a Slut," and the way that it almost sounds like it's coming through like a messaging machine.
right. She has quite a personality, quite a oozing of. Some of it is annoying. Some of the personality is grating, but at the same time, it's also charming
Her,
and
her
endearing.
voice her voice sounds like it's coming through some sort of advertisement or something,
Oh,
you know.
maybe.
I think that maybe that's the point, but I don't know as far as her musical career goes, how sustainable this is.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know how much longevity that she's going to get out of something like this, but it's curious. She can, I'm curious to see how it goes. Maybe
It's a
I'll
curi
listen to her second album.
it's an item of curiosity.
It is. Well, I think that was good for today. Back after 2 weeks, we've got Xiu Xiu in the bag, and then we got a few more albums that are pretty exciting coming down the line. We might have another omnibus that covers some of them because there's a few.